Good morning, Political Pulse checkers. This is your host, Ryan Painter, host of the Political Pulse podcast, and I am really happy to be back. I've been taking a bit of a break this summer, very much needed, I'm sure, but it's good to be back here chatting with you about all the important things that are happening in the world of politics. That is why I have Rahim Mohamed here, friend of the show, National Post columnist, all around awesome human being, to chat with us about the by-election happening today in Battle River-Crowfoot. Pierre Poilievre coming back onto the scene, trying to regain a position, a seat in the House of Commons after losing his seat in Carleton. But before we dive in, Rahim, thanks for joining us. How are you doing today?
Great to be here. Great to see you, Ryan. You're looking very rested and quite well.
Yes, well, it was good. I had a nice kind of honeymoon road trip with the wife. We got married in April, and of course, both very busy. But we did a road trip kind of to I think more of the lesser considered areas of BC. So we went through Hope, we went through Yale, stayed in Three Valley Gap, which I know you're probably familiar with there, went through the Okanagan, visited with family, and then came back through the Karamias Crow's Nest to get some really awesome Okanagan fruit. I think we can agree the best fruit in Canada comes from the Okanagan Valley.
Yes, especially the fermented variant of the grapes.
Yes, no doubt. And lots of those for sure. I mean, I have to say, growing up in the Okanagan, I lamented when I saw apple orchards and stuff. I mean, I grew up in Vernon, a lot of, the fruit union packers and all that stuff there. A lot of history, but
was it Vernon
I often,
they called the Little Apple, or was that Kelowna? It was one of the two.
I think it was Vernon, actually. Okay. I think so.
I know that was part of the branding for a very long time.
Well, and actually, if you look on my wall back here, I know you probably can't see it, but I've got a Buffalo Canadian Apples branding, whatever you want to call it, from the old days. So I actually picked that up when I was back home. Anyways, yeah, it was great. It was awesome. It was lots of fun. But we're here to talk about the by-election coming up today. So let's kind of take a 30,000-foot view for listeners who may not necessarily know why this by-election is happening, what it means, how did we get here, and what kind of a deal it is. Is it a big deal? Is it a small deal? Give us the lay of the land here, Rahim.
Sure. So just to set the context, Battle River-Crowfoot, it's the massive riding, just over 50,000 square kilometers, covers a good chunk of central, eastern, and southern Alberta. If you're a dinosaur person, you'll know Drumheller. I believe a fun fact is it's home to the largest concentration of dinosaur fossils anywhere in the world. Probably a big part of why Mr. Poilievre is jumping in Battle River-Crowfoot. It was one of the safest conservative ridings in the last federal election and has been for the last several election cycles. So Damien Turek, who we've heard a good bit about, who stepped aside to free up a seat for Mr. Poilievre, he won quite comfortably in that riding with 83% of the popular vote by a 70-something% margin over the second place finisher in that election, which was a Liberal. So, I've heard from a number of people who I've spoken to who live in the riding, that you can run a traffic cone or a hay bale or, pick your stand in the riding and put the label conservative on it. It's going to clear 65-70% of the popular vote. So I doubt Mr. Poilievre will have much trouble getting elected.
Yeah, and it really was interesting to note the location too. And I've had conversations with colleagues and friends in kind of the political world, and some of them were kind of asking, well, why didn't he pick a riding closer to Carleton? I mean, I think, is it Marilyn Gladue? No, there's someone who has a seat right close to him who's been there right near Carleton, who'd been there for quite a long time. And they thought, why didn't they back out? Why did he go so far away? But I think kind of the Alberta piece naturally made sense. I think being from Alberta originally, I think I've got that right. I think it was from Calgary or something like that. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, Rahim. I think that makes sense. It's very home for him. It's easy. It's a place where he can grab a seat. And this isn't uncommon either, right? Like if you look here in British Columbia, when Christy Clark became premier, she ran for a seat in Vancouver Point Grey. David Eby actually beat her. And so she had to find another seat. And she managed to find this seat in the Kelowna riding, the Kelowna area. And the gentleman who had the seat there had stepped back. So this isn't uncommon that leaders will find comfortable places to run to get back into the House, because it's important to be there. You can't be the leader of the opposition effectively if you're not in the House.
I believe Stockwell Day found a safe seat in Kelowna as well. When he became the leader of the Canadian Alliance Party. So it's something that again is not terribly.
Yeah. And so As we're kind of sitting here in the summer, we're kind of thinking through this by-election that's happening today. What are your expectations for what's going to happen? Is it going to be a blowout? Is there going to be anything that we should be looking out for, watching out for? What are your thoughts there?
Sure. Just by the simple mathematics, Mr. Kurek was one of five candidates. Mr. Polyev will be one of 214, I believe, candidates. So it's a much bigger pie. And I imagine, you'll have independent and third party campaigns each take, 0.5%, 1% here and there. So I think Mr. Polyev will be hard pressed to reach that 83% margin. If he doesn't, I don't think it's going to be a huge deal. I think there are going to be a few, less than flattering headlines over the next few days. We're in the dog days of summer. No one's really paying attention. The Blue Jays are doing very well. That's preoccupying a lot of people. I don't think the margin's going to make a ton of difference. One person who I'd say has had something of a breakout celebrity or been kind of a breakout figure in this riding is independent candidate Bonnie Critchley. She's a quite decorated 20 some odd year military veteran, actually born in Kelowna of all places, but kind of an army brat who's been here, there, and everywhere. And she's quite intelligently and strategically focused on local issues. Because she's running as an independent, she's had a free hand to take shots at some of the liberal policies that aren't super popular in the riding. The liberal gun control agenda and gun buyback program is one she's taken aim at. She's also been a strong advocate of this emerging right to repair movement in a number of rural areas like Battle River-Crowfoot and farming places in Alberta. It's basically as things like John Deere tractors and other specialized farm equipments, as they're becoming more computerized and more dependent on proprietary software, it's become more challenging for farmers to either do DIY repairs or send their equipment to local repair shops. Increasingly, they're having to bring in a John Deere or Rocky Mountain equipment or Caterpillar specialist from 1.5, 2 hours away to drive all the way to their farm or ranch just to unlock the equipment so that they can repair it. So that's another issue that Miss Critchley is seized on. Probably not too salient to you and I. It's not a huge deal for me to take my iPhone to a Genius Bar or for me to take my Volkswagen to an authorized dealer. It's a much bigger deal if you're in a far-flung rural area like Battle River-Crowfoot. So that's a important and quite niche issue she's been able to seize on. So we'll see if she's able to get any sort of momentum from those sorts of things. And beyond that, she's been doing her rounds in the national media. She did a podcast with Ryan Jesperson, a really big podcaster out of Edmonton, a few weeks back. She sat down for an interview with David Cochran and the CBC. She's picked up some big endorsements from outside the riding. Arlene Dickinson of Dragon's Den is Team Critchley. So we'll see how much momentum Miss Critchley can get. I would imagine she tops out at around the 10 or 15% margin, but that alone could be a story if she's able to really capture momentum at the ground level on the riding.
And then maybe potentially parlay that into some kind of provincial thing. I'm thinking, because
city council,
I don't think
mayor.
there's yeah, even municipal. I think there's definitely opportunity there for her, and I've certainly seen her name out there. I mean, it'd be hard pressed for anyone who's involved in politics to not see her come out from all of this. But I think definitely the story will be Pierre Poilievre getting back into the House, winning the seat. I think it's definitely a foregone conclusion. I wonder, from your impression, the fact that it is more or less a foregone conclusion, do you have any idea what turnout's going to be like? Is it going to be 20, 30%? Is it going to be I know we're kind of shooting in the dark here, but I just wonder your thoughts about where it's going to land, given that, as you say, it is the dog days of summer. We are in a place where people aren't necessarily paying attention. They're on vacation. They're kind of maybe a little bit lax out on the lake, out in the cabin or something. So what do you think about turnout? And does turnout matter in a by-election like this?
Well, we've had early voting already. So we had a period of early voting, I believe, between Friday and Monday of last week. The early turnout was within 15 or 20 votes of what early turnout was in April. It was very close. It was almost identical. So I think this is one of those ridings where people are really active at the local level. You have a lot of kind of local community spirit and participation. People go to town halls, people go to barbecues, community sports are really big in the riding, kind of the community agriculture culture as well, rodeos, etc. So I think we'll see something along the lines of what we got in April, which I believe was somewhere in the low to mid 70s. I think that's about what we're going to get this time around. I think this is a really healthy community with a strong custom of local participation in things like local elections. So I don't think you're going to see too much deviation from that come today.
One of the stories that I think was capturing a lot of attention because it did this in Carleton and it did this for a little bit here was that longest ballot committee and trying to just pack this ballot with as many people as possible. And it was, I have to admit, that whole thing was challenging for me because as someone who generally believes in democracy and the right of people to run and to try to get representation and to speak their voice and all that, I'm generally in favor of people putting their names forward. It's not an easy thing to do to put your name on a ballot, right? Like there's an emotive aspect to it. So at that point, I kind of thought, okay, I wonder if this is something that I can find my way to criticizing without kind of invalidating my thoughts around democratic participation. And then kind of just seeing it blow up, as you say, like, 190, 200 people on a ballot. It really does almost feel like it's being made a mockery of. Like, it feels wrong in a way. Like, I don't think your average person can look at that and say this is right.
Yeah, and a number of people I've spoken to in the riding are especially disappointed because this was, Mr. Polyev is someone who could still very well be Canada's next prime minister. We're at a period of time where there's a lot of strain and a lot of disconnect between places like rural Alberta and Ottawa, and a number of kind of the smaller party and independent candidates who I've spoken to really wanted to use this as an opportunity to press Mr. Polyev on the Alberta-Ottawa relationship, press him on things like the equalization program and how it serves Alberta, whether Alberta is getting hosed through the current configuration of the equalization program, press him on things like supply management. Should effectively a cartel that largely protects 10,000 well-protected farmers in Quebec. Should that be a hill for Canada to die on in Canada-US trade negotiations? If so, why? Just more broadly, the question of a potential referendum on independence in Alberta next year. Will Mr. Polyev respect whatever the result of that referendum is provincially and among voters in his riding? And because the longest ballot committee sucks so much of the oxygen out of the news cycle, I think a lot of those questions went unanswered. And those opportunities to really press Mr. Polyev on those issues of local and provincial importance at a time where Ottawa-Western Canada relations are tenuous, to say the very least. That was something that felt disrespectful, especially when you get further into the fact that this is largely an out-of-province group. The individual who's the campaign manager or the authorized agent for all these candidates, I believe he's a Government of Canada worker based in Winnipeg. A good number of these candidates come from places like Ontario. So it really did feel like a number of carpetbaggers coming from outside the province and hijacking what should have been a really important conversation about Alberta's continued place in Canada. And sort of what Mr. Polyev would do to mend those fences as the next member of parliament from Alberta.
So where are we with this kind of longest ballot stuff? Has Elections Canada had any comments about it? Has there been any kind of thinking around what do we do in the future to ensure? Because I'll say one of the first times and I've been doing this politics thing for a while, but I was kind of naive to the fact that you could run anywhere in Canada, wherever you lived. So I remember it was 2015. I was managing an election campaign in Saanich Gulf Islands for the UNDP candidate against Elizabeth May. And I realized that not only was Elizabeth May's campaign manager a candidate in Quebec, but her daughter was also a candidate in Quebec. And I was like, I think I knew, but it hit me at that point, like, you can literally be a candidate no matter what, like anywhere you are, right? And so I guess there's a concern there about, okay, well, if you can just be a candidate anywhere, should we be reining that in a little bit? Should we be doing something to, I guess, dial down the pervasiveness of this anyone, anywhere, run anywhere just to get a name on a ballot?
So I believe a sort of band-aid solution Election Canada's rolling out for this election is, we're not going to print these massive 90-foot ballots or whatever it is with 214 names. They changed voting to write-in voting exclusively, which is just going to kind of gum up the process of counting the ballots and make things harder and make things slower for everyone involved. So it's an irritation that I think, if I can editorialize a bit, does the exact opposite of what the group is intending it to do. I think there are constructive conversations that we can and should have about how well first past the post serves Canada and other sort of models of electoral reform or other electoral systems that could be a better fit for the country. But I think what this does is it hijacks that conversation. It drowns out legitimate voices and it just puts everyone off. In terms of what Elections Canada's thinking, I can't say at present, but I can tell you that there is a change that was recently made in Alberta where basically there has to be a 1-to-1 ratio between agents and candidates. So a single agent can only represent one candidate. So if you look at the list of a list of candidates in Battle River-Crowfoot, everyone on that longest ballot committee is represented by the same agent, Tom Shukovich, or some complicated last name I haven't committed to memory. But yeah, so I think that's one change that could be put quite easily into place at the federal level. There's also discussion about reinstating a fee to appear on the ballot. So it was recently waived. I think beforehand it was $1,000. So I think it is sad that maybe the one lasting contribution the longest ballot committee will have is there was a change made to make it more inclusive for candidates to get on a ballot, without forking over $1,000. That potentially could be reversed because the longest ballot committee exploited that generosity.
That actually is really interesting because in an effort to try to for whatever their reason for doing all of this is, to try to broaden democracy, they've actually shrank it.
Yeah,
shrank it down.
I think that's as damning of an indictment as you're going to get.
Wow. So let's draw out here, look at the national picture. And I want to just ask you in the last kind of 10 minutes that we have, conservative politics in Canada today. It's interesting to look at where kind of the conservative landscape was maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. Pierre Poilievre, extraordinarily popular. You'll likely remember in the 2013 election here in British Columbia. I harken back to this a lot. Michael Smith wrote a piece for the province with Adrian Dix on the front of it that said this guy could kick a dog and he'd still win the election. I think there was very much a sentiment that Pierre Poilievre was going to win the next federal election no matter what. Certainly in Trudeau, he had a very beatable candidate. You look where we're at now. Obviously, he didn't win the last election, although he did gain a number of seats, certainly here in British Columbia. And I think the kind of conservative movement in and of itself, some people really kind of wince when they say conservative movement. They don't necessarily like those two words being put together. But I digress. Here in British Columbia, we have a very strong official opposition led by John Rustad. We've still got strong conservative parties in Alberta and Saskatchewan. Doug Ford, whether you say he's a conservative or not, he's an extraordinarily successful conservative premier. You've got Tim Houston in Nova Scotia. So the conservative brand in and of itself, it seems very strong in Canada today. So where are we at with kind of the landscape? Because conservatism across the country does seem a little bit different no matter kind of where you are.
I would agree with that, but I would also say there's a very clear to me east-west schism. Kind of Doug Ford, and bear in mind, Doug Ford and Tim Houston are very self-consciously and very intentionally progressive conservatives. Mm-hmm. Neither of them endorsed Mr. Poilievre in this year's federal election. If anything, Premier Ford and people like Corey Tanaik, who are more affiliated with the Ontario Progressive Conservatives, took little shots here and there that seemed to reflect sort of personal animosities and potentially schisms in sort of the amount of government intervention and control people are comfortable with in Ontario and Atlantic Canada versus kind of more of a libertarian, I think, bearing in Western Canada. And I think a really interesting microcosm of that disconnect that's going on right now is if you look at Nova Scotia, again, which has a conservative premier, in New Brunswick, and the sorts of restrictions they're rolling out surrounding wildfire risks. So in Nova Scotia, you had, I would almost use the term draconian, a draconian ban in sort of entering the woods for any reason, to hike, to forage, to fish, under threat of a $25,000 fine. Something like that, I think, understandably drew, despite being passed under the auspices of a nominally progressive conservative premier, it drew quite a strong pushback in Western Canada, where people were reminded of the sorts of restrictions we saw on physical movement at the height of the COVID pandemic. So to me, it seems as though you have, beyond the kind of petty personal differences between someone like Doug Ford and Pierre Poilievre, you have a lot of ideological and philosophical divisions between what progressive conservatism looks like in Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic Canada, and what conservative looks like west of Thunder Bay. And I don't know how easy it's going to be to adjudicate those sorts of divisions. So I can just as well see your Doug Ford, Mark Carney voter in the Greater Toronto area, or your Tim Houston, Mark Carney voter in Halifax, sort of driving the bus in terms of what government at the federal level is going to look like for the foreseeable future.
Well, and it's interesting you mentioned the kind of ban on parks stuff that they brought in Nova Scotia, because as you know, you're from the interior British Columbia, so am I. We kind of grow up with fires as our next door neighbors, right? Like that's just kind of how it is, and you grow up responsibly, understanding how to go up. I don't recall ever growing up and saying, okay, well, you know, there's a fire ban on, but I remember going camping with my parents when I was a kid, and there were fire bans on. We still went into parks. We pitched our tents. We found other ways to make food. I think we may have had like a little propane heater or something that we brought with us, or like a little gas camp stove. But the thought that, you know, we're so scared of people starting fires that we're just going to ban people and we're going to fine them $25,000 for coming in. Your word draconian, I think, was apt. And it was interesting to see folks like Fred Delaroy, who is a conservative commentator, Delore, come in kind of talking about this, saying he's from Nova Scotia. It makes perfect sense. And it's kind of like, well, no, it doesn't. Like, you can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Well, and he also said, if you don't understand the ban, if you don't understand why we're doing this, you don't understand our culture. And
yeah, which was weird. Well, no, it was weird. Like, what? A culture of just not going places because you're scared of other people's irresponsibility? Like, okay, well, then let's just shut down everything. I mean, at some point, you have to kind of treat people like adults, don't you? Or am I off base here?
I mean, we're two Western Canadians having this conversation. So I'm nodding my head to a lot of what you're saying, but I understand, you know, we're not a geographically representative group. It is, you know, I've had good fortune. I've got family in Cape Breton. I've spent some time in Nova Scotia. I didn't grow up there. I didn't really absorb cultural values that are characteristic of someone who's grown up in Atlantic Canada. So maybe I will give someone like Fred Delaroy. It's interesting, Lisa Ray, formerly the deputy leader of the Conservative Party of Canada under Andrew Scheer, has already also spoken in favor of these restrictions. So maybe it is just kind of there is a culture toward government intervention in Atlantic Canada that me as a Western Canadian, I don't totally jive with. I don't totally understand, because that's not, those aren't values I was socialized with when I was growing up. So, you know, but I viscerally, I agree with a lot of what you're saying.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think we kind of, to your point, I hate to use the phrase two solitudes, but because that's generally preserved for the English-French Canada debate. But I think you're very much right in terms of the divide, the schism, I think is reasonable. We saw it with Jamil Javani once the election was over. He had a very, very public comment that he made about Doug Ford and how they didn't help during the federal election. And yeah, you're right. I don't know how we heal that. I know the Canada Strong and Free Conference is coming up in September. I think that generally is considered, that's kind of the former Manning Institute, Preston Manning stuff. I don't know if that's generally something that is very kumbaya-ish for kind of the conservative movement to come together, but possibly there's opportunities there for folks to heal. But I do think, and we'll wrap up with this. I think what it did show, that kind of divide, is that it can lose an election when you don't have people working together, you don't have people talking together, helping, supporting each other. It can cost votes, it can cost an election, and maybe, and I'm not saying this is the case, but maybe that's what certain people wanted. I don't know.
Who knows?
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a very interesting year or so ahead, not just for Mr. Poilievre, but for the conservative movement in Canada.
Yeah, very much. Well, Rahim, any final thoughts before we let you go on to the rest of your day? I'm sure you've got a lot you're working on. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I really think, they should have just stuck with John Cena's heel turn.
Yes.
Bothered me that they would go kind of halfway with it and then do a 180 around SummerSlam.
Yeah, actually, I'm really glad you brought this up because it's been pissing me off. Keep him there. Keep him as the heel until he has his graceful exit out the door. Why now? Like, why do this? I feel like I'm being jerked around. It doesn't make sense to me at all.
I feel like they chickened out.
Yeah.
Like for me, I mean, don't do anything halfway. You either do it or don't do it.
Well, is it like where was it fan service? Was it ego? I can't think it was a John Cena thing.
I think there were, from what I understand, there was an expectation of the involvement of The Rock and Travis Scott.
Right.
Kind of throughout Cena's shift to the dark side. And I think both of them didn't follow through on what was planned for the storyline.
Yeah, they've been absent. Like they've been gone.
Yeah. And it's interesting because The Rock teased a lot of things that he never really followed through on. So I think there was a sense, let's just pull the plug. We don't have these other pieces in place for whatever they were planning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And on that, and because you brought it up and because we are two wrestling geeks, the passing of Hulk Hogan, I mean, that hit me. I've cried a few times in my life. Like I'm a bit of a crier, but largely meant for either personal emotional trauma or family stuff, but I did cry when I heard that he passed away. And for what a lot of stuff is out there about things that he'd done or the person who he was or whatever, this is someone who I loved as a kid growing up watching wrestling. Right, sure. He was my first hero.
Yeah, and what I will say on that other stuff is, and I try to remember this myself as someone who made his name as a political commentator. There's always an option to say nothing. When someone of this magnitude, I don't think it's hyperbole to say professional wrestling might not exist in its current form today if it weren't for this one individual, Hulk Hogan. There are very few people about whom you could say the field they worked in would not look the same today. Maybe might not even exist today. At the kind of national and international scale, you have to remember that Hulk Hogan is the guy who more than anyone else cracked the territorial system. So it could potentially be there's this little thing in New York City, there's this little thing in Charlotte, there's this little thing in Dallas. Wrestling, as this kind of global pop culture phenomenon might not be what it is today if it weren't for Hulk Hogan. So when someone of that magnitude passes away, I don't want to read, think pieces on their complex legacies. Yes, he totally reinvented professional wrestling and popular culture and potentially even politics as we know it today. But he made this problematic comment here, there, and ever. Like I just, if you can't offer a stirring tribute, immediately a day or two after the individual passes, and you can't speak glowingly on the transformative impact he has on his field, it's okay to say nothing.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Rahim. I appreciate that. And thank you again for joining me today back on the show. Third time on the show. You're the first third.
Sorry it's been so long, but congratulations on joining the Hobby Club.
Thank you.
Best club in the world.
It is the best club in the world.
Best decision I've ever made.
Best. Yes. Yeah, me as well. No, it's a good club to be a part of. And I look forward to the next time you're here on the West Coast. I'll treat you to some good West Coast beer when you're here next time.
Likewise, looking forward to it.
Thanks, brother.